private jet, a locked door, a crowd of powerful people deciding who belongs, and a 17-year-old black engineer named Leah Morgan, holding the code that could open everything. When the airport CEO orders her to step aside, is it about security or about who gets to claim authority in the rooms like these? Who gets to decide where brilliance is allowed to sit? In a sky where systems can be hacked and stories can be twisted, what speaks louder? A rumor whispered in a lounge or a log file that records the truth in real time? Watch Leah pick her moment. Watch a door that said, "No," become a door that listens. But if she can unlock the aircraft with her own code, what will it cost her to lock out the people determined to erase her? And when the proof is undeniable, who will stand with her, and who will try to write her out of the ending? If this kind of story matters to you, tap like, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Ready? Let's begin. She doesn't belong on this aircraft. The words sliced through the stillness of the private terminal, like the sudden crack of a thunderclap. 17-year-old Leah Morgan stopped mid-step, her sneakers just inches from the first gleaming stare of the Aeroglobe Gulfstream G700 waiting on the tarmac. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. But the sharp, clipped tone of the man standing in front of her left no doubt. Colin Pratt, the CEO of Atlanta Peachtree Private Terminal, didn't bother lowering his voice. His hand, pale and manicured, rested loosely on the chrome railing that separated the boarding area from the aircraft's stairs. The white collar of his shirt seemed to glow under the recessed lighting, as if daring anyone to challenge his authority. His expression was cool, assessing, and utterly certain that he was right. Behind him, a pilot in a pressed Navy uniform shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the open cabin door. Two flight attendants exchanged the kind of knowing look that comes from having seen this before the subtle coded ways power draws its lines. Leah's grip tightened on the tablet in her hands. Its black glass reflected her face in a distorted curve, hiding the steady blaze in her dark eyes. She forced her voice to remain calm. "Sir, I have authorization to board this flight." Pratt's gaze didn't waver. "This is a $12 million aircraft bound for the International Tech Summit in San Francisco. We are transporting senior executives, industry leaders, and potential investors. This is not a school trip." His words landed in the air with the weight of judgment disguised as protocol. He turned slightly, signaling to a pair of uniformed security personnel standing nearby. "Please, escort Miss Morgan back to the main terminal. She can wait for a commercial connection." A ripple of murmurs swept through the small group of passengers gathered in the lounge. Some looked away, pretending not to notice. Others allowed a thin edge of curiosity or satisfaction to creep into their stares. Leah's cheeks burned, but not from shame. It was the heat of being dismissed, of having her presence reduced to a mistake to be corrected. She took a breath, recalling the way her father always told her to ground herself in moments like this. In through the nose, out through the mouth. "Mr. Pratt," she said, each word even. "I'm not here as a passenger. I'm the system designer for the new aircraft security protocol being implemented on this flight. My job is to monitor it in real time." His brows lifted, the gesture steeped in disbelief. "You?" The single syllable carried a lifetime of assumptions about age, about gender, about skin color wrapped in a polite veneer. Leah opened her mouth to explain further, but Pratt's voice cut across hers. louder now. Your name is not on the manifest. Your credentials do not match the approved crew list. And in a security-sensitive operation, that means one thing: you are not authorized to board. The security officers stepped forward. In the far corner of the lounge, a man in a charcoal suit set down his glass of amber liquid and leaned forward, watching the exchange with open interest. The faint tick of an expensive watch caught the light. Leah's fingers flexed against her tablet. She could feel the weight of every stare measuring her, questioning her, deciding who she was before she had spoken a full paragraph. This wasn't just a barrier to a boarding door. This was the kind of moment her father had warned her about, the ones where the fight was never really about the rules, but about whether you were seen as belonging in the first place. Her voice didn't shake when she tried again. If you would just check with I've checked everything I need to check. Pratt interrupted, his tone as final as the slam of a judge's gavel. We run this terminal on clear procedures, not personal exceptions. Somewhere to her left. A muffled laugh broke the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. She didn't need to know what the joke was to feel the sting. The warmth of the Georgia morning pressed through the glass walls of the terminal, but inside, the air felt cold, sterile. The hum of distant jet engines underscored the quiet tension between them. She could push harder right now. She could demand that someone call Elena Morales, the head of security at Aeroglobe. She could drop Margaret Kane's name, the CEO herself, and dare him to refuse her in front of that authority. But she knew how quickly such moments could turn. How easily the narrative could be spun into unprofessional or aggressive if she didn't measure her steps. Leah inhaled, her father's voice echoing in her head. Pick the moment you want to win. She held Pratt's gaze, letting the silence stretch just long enough to register that she was not conceding, merely choosing not to escalate here. Not yet. Because the truth was, this wasn't where her story began, and it wasn't where it would end. To understand why I'm standing here, she said quietly, almost to herself, you'd have to go back to where this started. The terminal, the aircraft. The voices faded in her mind, replaced by the familiar warmth of home. The smell of something simmering on the stove, and the low hum of conversation with the one person who had always believed she belonged anywhere her mind could take her. The memory begins in the soft golden light of the kitchen, the kind of light that makes even the edges of a hard day feel a little gentler. Leah sat at the worn oak table in her father's house, a plate of steaming pasta in front of her. The walls around them were painted a deep, comforting sage green. Framed photographs covered nearly every inch David Morgan in his younger years standing beside test aircraft. Snapshots of Leah in oversized science fair t-shirts, hair tied back in a messy ponytail, a few sun-faded pictures of her mother smiling into the camera. Dinner at the Morgans was never about the food alone. It was where the day got unpacked, where ideas and worries tumbled into the open. Tonight, Leah picked at her meal more than she ate it. Her fork twisted the pasta into small knots, then let it fall back to the plate. David noticed. He always noticed. Something on your mind, kiddo? He asked, his voice carrying the low, steady timbre of someone who had weathered more storms than he could count. Leah glanced up, meeting his eyes. They were the same deep brown as hers, lined at the corners with years of squinting into sunlit hangars and reading fine print on engineering schematics. I keep thinking about tomorrow, she admitted. What if they don't take me seriously? What if I freeze in the middle of explaining the system? What if he raised a hand, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips? What did I tell you about what ifs? She sighed, already knowing where this was going. They're just fear trying to sound smart. Exactly, he said, leaning back in his chair. And you've already done the work. You know this system better than anyone alive. That's not arrogance. Leah, that's just the truth. She wanted to believe him. She really did, but she also knew the kinds of rooms she would be walking into. Rooms where people twice her age would measure her in the first 5 seconds and decide she wasn't worth listening to. David must have read the doubt in her face because his tone softened. Look, the aerospace world hasn't exactly been a warm welcome for folks who don't fit the mold. I've been in those meetings. I've seen the looks. But you've got something that changes the conversation results. They can't argue with results. Leah pushed her plate away, appetite gone. You make it sound so simple. It's not, he admitted, folding his hands on the table. But that's why you prepare. You'll go in tomorrow knowing your system inside and out, and you'll speak with the authority that comes from doing the work. You won't need to raise your voice. The truth carries its own volume. In the corner of the kitchen, a clock ticked steadily. It was an old brass thing that had belonged to David's father, a reminder of the Morgan family's long connection to time, precision, and the skies. Leah stared at it for a moment, letting its rhythm calm her. She got up to clear her plate, but David stopped her with a question. Walk me through it again, from the start. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. He wasn't testing her. This was his way of reminding her she was ready. Okay, she began, leaning against the counter. The problem with most private jet security systems is that they rely on static authentication codes or single-point verification. That makes them vulnerable to interception and spoofing. He nodded. And your fix. My system uses a 3-layered approach. First is biometric verification fingerprints, retina scan, whatever the operator prefers. Second is personalized user credentials that are unique to each approved person. And third is a dynamic authorization code that changes every 30 seconds based on a proprietary algorithm. If any one of those factors fails, access is denied and an alert is sent to the system administrator immediately. David's expression showed the quiet pride he rarely put into words. And what happens tomorrow? They'll run the system during the flight to San Francisco. I'll monitor it from on board to make sure it integrates seamlessly. If it works, Aeroglobe can roll it out across the fleet, and maybe, just maybe, it becomes the new industry standard. He gave a short laugh. That's my girl. Thinking about the big picture. Later, upstairs in her room. Leah sat cross-legged on the bed with her laptop open. The blue glow lit her face as lines of code scrolled by. Around her, the space was a strange mix of teenage clutter and advanced tech, an old teddy bear sitting next to a soldering kit. Posters of pioneering women in science taped alongside aerospace schematics. She made small adjustments to her monitoring interface, fingers moving quickly but deliberately. It wasn't about rewriting the system now. It was about perfecting the way she would present it tomorrow. Every click was a step toward confidence. From the doorway came the familiar scent of cocoa. David stepped in, carrying 2 mugs topped with a generous handful of marshmallows. I figured a brain boost wouldn't hurt, he said, setting one mug beside her laptop. She smiled and took a sip. The warmth was immediate, settling the knot in her stomach. "You nervous?" he asked, settling onto the edge of the bed. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good," he said with a small grin. "Means you care enough to do it right." They sat for a while in companionable silence. The only sounds the ticking of the clock downstairs and the faint hum of her laptop. Leah's thoughts drifted briefly to her mother, to the way she used to stand in the doorway when Leah worked on her first little circuit boards. "You see patterns no one else sees," she had once said. "That's your superpower." When David finally stood to leave, he rested a hand on her shoulder. "Get some sleep. Leah, the code will still be here in the morning." She promised she would, though they both knew she'd probably be up another hour fine-tuning. Before she finally closed the laptop, Leah looked out her bedroom window. The Atlanta night sky was hazy with light pollution, but she could still pick out a few stars. She thought of her mother's words, of the light traveling years to reach her eyes. Maybe tomorrow would be like that, an idea she had nurtured for years finally shining in a place where others could see it. When she lay down, her mind didn't replay worst-case scenarios the way it had earlier. Instead, it wandered through the possibilities. The ones her father had told her were hers to see. And somewhere between those thoughts and the steady rhythm of her breathing, sleep found her. Morning light spilled across the polished stone floor of Aeroglobe Aviation's headquarters in Chicago, turning the vast lobby into a reflection of glass and steel. The building itself seemed to hum with quiet confidence, its design echoing the sleek lines of the aircraft it produced. Leah stepped through the revolving doors with her father at her side, the wheels of her small carry-on clicking against the floor. The air smelled faintly of coffee and industrial cleaner, the scent of business done at a high level. David glanced at her as they approached the reception desk. "Remember, you're not here to impress them with flash. You're here to give them something they didn't even realize they needed." The receptionist greeted them warmly and handed over 2 visitor badges. "Conference Room Concord. Elevator to the 12th floor. They're expecting you." As they rode up, Leah's pulse quickened. She had rehearsed this presentation 100 times, refining her slides, sharpening her explanations, imagining every possible question they might throw at her. But rehearsals didn't come with the weight of actual decision-makers in the room. The doors opened to a long corridor lined with framed photographs of Aeroglobe's fleet and milestones. At the far end, the Concord room stood waiting, its glass doors revealing a polished table that could seat at least 20. Inside, the atmosphere was brisk but not unfriendly. A few people were already seated, murmuring to each other while scrolling through tablets. At the head of the table sat Margaret Kane, CEO of Aeroglobe Aviation. Her presence filled the space effortlessly, sharp eyes, composed posture, a quiet authority that didn't need raising its voice to command attention. "Ms. Morgan," Kane said as Leah approached, "I've heard interesting things about your work." Leah returned her handshake. "Thank you for having me. Ms. Kane, I'm looking forward to showing you what the system can do." On Kane's left sat Richard Voss, the board chairman. His expression was cool, his fingers steepled as if weighing the value of each person in the room before they even spoke. He gave Leah a polite nod, but his eyes carried a hint of skepticism that didn't surprise her. Further down the table was Elena Morales, head of security. Leah recognized her immediately from their video calls. Morales offered a quick smile, the kind that carried genuine warmth, but also a hint of warning: be ready. They will test you. Once everyone had settled, Kane gestured for Leah to begin. Leah connected her tablet to the wall display. The first slide illuminated the room with a schematic of a standard private jet security system. Before I explain my solution, I want to highlight the vulnerabilities in the current model, she began, her voice steady despite the weight of so many eyes. Most systems rely on static codes or single-point authentication. That creates at least 6 exploitable gaps, from code interception to relay attacks. She moved through the diagrams methodically, pointing out each flaw without overcomplicating the language. When she glanced at Elena Morales, the head of security was already nodding. Richard Voss, however, sat perfectly still, his pen tapping lightly against a closed leather folder. The most concerning issue, Leah continued, is what I call the ghost protocol gap. This occurs when authentication timeouts leave a brief window in which an unauthorized user can piggyback access. Voss raised an eyebrow. And your system prevents this. How exactly? Leah was ready for that. Through a multi-layered, adaptive approach. First, biometric verification. Second, unique user credentials tied to specific individuals. And third, a dynamic authorization code that changes every 30 seconds, generated by an algorithm that factors in time, device signature, and user identity. She tapped her tablet, and a simulation appeared on the screen. A mock intrusion attempt unfolded, only to be denied at each stage, the system adapting in real time. Kane leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on the display. What's the failure rate under stress testing? Less than 1%. And in those cases, access was denied, not granted. The system errs on the side of safety. Elena Morales spoke up. What about compatibility with older models? Some of our fleet dates back over a decade. The software integrates into existing hardware with minimal modification. Leah replied, I've designed it to work on a modular basis, so it can be deployed gradually without grounding entire fleets. Voss scribbled something in his folder but said nothing. Leah pressed on, showing cost projections, implementation timelines, and case studies from the prototype tests she had run with smaller operators. For 45 minutes, the room's energy shifted from polite curiosity to engaged interest. Even Voss stopped tapping his pen and began leaning forward slightly. Kane's questions grew sharper, but not hostile. She was pushing to see how Leah handled pressure. When the final slide faded, Leah concluded, Next Gen Secure offers Aeroglobe a competitive edge in safety, efficiency, and brand trust. It's not just about meeting industry standards, it's about setting them. A pause settled over the table. Leah's heart thudded in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. Kane was the first to speak. Miss Morgan, your work is impressive. We'll need to see how it performs in a live environment. But the concept is solid. I'd like to authorize a prototype test on one of our flagship routes. Elena Morales nodded in agreement. I'll coordinate with you directly. Leah will set up the integration and training for the crew. Voss finally spoke, his voice measured. We should be cautious. Innovation is fine, but implementation is where most good ideas go to die. Let's make sure this one doesn't waste our time. Leah met his gaze without flinching. I plan to make sure it doesn't, Mr. Voss. That earned her a faint, almost imperceptible smirk from him. David, seated quietly at the back of the room, allowed himself the smallest exhale of pride. He had said nothing throughout, just watching his daughter hold her ground in the kind of room he knew could devour the unprepared. As the meeting broke up, Kane approached Leah once more. "The tech summit in San Francisco is in 3 months. If the test is successful, I want you there to present it to the industry, and you'll fly on the aircraft that's running your system." Leah felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. "I'll be ready," walking out into the bright Chicago afternoon. David put a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just hold your own in there. You owned it." She smiled, though she knew the hardest parts were still ahead. The test flight would be the true measure, and if there was one thing she understood, it was that proving yourself once didn't guarantee you'd be seen the next time. The first week after Leah's presentation felt like a quiet exhale. She had walked into Aeroglobe's most intimidating boardroom and left with an invitation to prove her design in the real world. But that exhale didn't last long. 3 days later, she was back in Chicago, this time in the secure operations wing of Aeroglobe's headquarters, meeting with Elena Morales. The security office was a hive of silent concentration. Monitors lined the walls, each screen displaying maps of flight paths, live cabin feeds, and system diagnostics for dozens of aircraft in the air at that very moment. The faint hum of servers filled the space like a constant reminder that here, the work never stopped. Elena greeted her with a firm handshake. "All right, Leah, this is where we make your system prove itself. We have 12 weeks until the Tech Summit flight. In that time, you'll be integrating Next-Gen Secure into our flagship Gulfstream G700, testing it under every condition we can simulate." Leah nodded, excitement tightening in her chest. "I'm ready. I know you are," Elena said, her voice low but confident. "But this is a different arena than your lab at home. Here, you'll have to defend your design against more than just hypothetical scenarios. The people here will try to break it, not because they doubt you personally, but because that's their job." The first trial began that same day. Leah sat at a workstation in front of a massive curved monitor, her tablet linked into the simulation environment. Elena's team initiated a series of intrusion attempts, each one designed to mimic a real-world hacking strategy. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. Leah's code adapted flawlessly, denying access without so much as a hesitation. But late in the afternoon, a simulated breach attempt from an insider profile triggered an unexpected delay in the authentication process. The system still denied access, but not before a 3-second lag appeared on the log. 3 seconds is too long, one of the senior engineers remarked from across the room. His tone clipped. Leah felt the prickle of defensiveness rise but pushed it down. "I'll refine the handshake sequence to eliminate the lag," she said calmly, already typing the adjustments. That night, back in her hotel room, she replayed the logs over and over. The vulnerability wasn't fatal, but it was the kind of detail critics could latch on to. She imagined Richard Voss's raised eyebrow if he saw it. By midnight, she had rewritten part of the algorithm, tightening the handshake process and reducing the lag to less than 1/4 of a second. Weeks passed in a blur of code reviews, simulated flight tests, and hardware integration drills. Leah spent more time in Chicago than at home, but whenever she returned to Atlanta, David was there at the airport to pick her up. He never pressed for details she wasn't ready to share, only asked, "What's the next hurdle?" Some days the hurdles felt small, a misaligned sensor, a faulty biometric scanner in one of the test modules. Other days, they felt like walls. There was one particularly grueling week when nothing seemed to work. A software patch corrupted a batch of test data, forcing her to rebuild an entire segment of the authentication sequence from scratch. On the fourth night of that week, Leah sat alone in the darkened security office, her eyes aching from staring at lines of code. The city lights outside blurred through the glass as she leaned back, pressing the heels of her hands to her eyes. "You're still here." Elena's voice came from behind her. Leah turned. "I just need to get this part right before I leave." Elena walked over and studied the code on the screen. "You know," she said, "the first time I was trusted with a major system upgrade, I nearly sabotaged myself trying to make it perfect. I thought if there was one tiny flaw, it meant I didn't deserve the opportunity. But the truth is, systems evolve. What matters is that you're building something stronger than what came before. That's enough to earn your place." Leah absorbed the words slowly, letting them settle. She didn't reply, but later that night, as she finally shut down her station, she realized that part of her tension had eased. By week 10, the test logs told a different story than they had at the start. Breach attempts were denied in under a second, even the insider simulations. False positives had dropped to nearly zero. The biometric scans synced seamlessly with the dynamic authorization codes, the entire process invisible to the end user but ironclad in security. One afternoon, Elena called Leah into her office. A model of the Gulfstream G700 sat on the shelf behind her desk, its white fuselage gleaming under the overhead light. "We're ready for the live run," Elena said. "The summit flight will be the first operational use of your system. You'll be on board to monitor in real time." Leah smiled, a mix of pride and relief washing over her. "Thank you, Elena." "There's one thing," Elena added. "I recommended to Margaret Kane that you be listed on the official crew manifest for the flight. That way, no one questions why you're there." "That's a good idea," Leah said, though a faint unease tugged at her. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why do I feel like you're not convinced?" Leah hesitated. "Because I know how these things can change at the last minute. People higher up the chain make adjustments, and suddenly the person doing the work isn't the person on the plane." Elena's gaze was steady. "If anyone tries that, they'll have to go through me." 2 weeks later, Leah was back in Atlanta, her bags packed for the most important flight of her life. She had triple-checked her system, loaded her monitoring tools onto her tablet, and even brought a secondary backup in case of hardware failure the night before departure. David made his signature pancakes for dinner a tradition for big days in the Morgan family. As they sat at the table, he poured syrup over his own plate and said, "Tomorrow, you'll be in the air with your own work keeping everyone safe. That's bigger than any meeting or handshake. Remember that when the nerves hit." She smiled. "I will." And she meant it. At least, she thought she did. Because in the quiet hours before dawn, a different kind of anticipation hummed under her skin. She had prepared for technical glitches, for system malfunctions, for the scrutiny of industry leaders. But she hadn't yet imagined that the real turbulence might come from the people standing between her and that boarding staircase. The morning air at Atlanta Peachtree Private Terminal carried a faint scent of jet fuel, warm asphalt, and fresh coffee from a nearby kiosk. The low hum of idling engines blended with the soft beeping of luggage carts. Sunlight glinted off the silver fuselage of private jets lined up on the tarmac, their tails casting long, sleek shadows. Leah's heart lifted a little as she stepped out of the rideshare and took in the aircraft that would soon carry her system into the skies. She wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse, her hair neatly tied back. Her father had insisted on driving her, but she had refused gently. This was something she needed to walk into on her own, inside the terminal. The reception area was a blend of quiet luxury and efficient movement. Leather armchairs lined one wall, a massive window offered a perfect view of the runway, and a single crystal vase of lilies sat on the counter. Leah approached the check-in desk where a man in a tailored gray suit looked up from his tablet. "Good morning," name he asked without looking up again. "Leah Morgan. I'm listed as part of the crew for the Aeroglobe G700 to San Francisco." The man tapped at his screen, his brow furrowing slightly. He scanned the list again, then a third time. "I'm sorry, Ms. Morgan, but you're not on the manifest." Her stomach dropped. "That's not possible. I was confirmed by Elena Morales herself. I'm here to monitor the security system on board." He gave her the kind of polite but firm smile that signaled he had no interest in bending rules. "I understand, but I can only check in those listed here." Leah took a steadying breath. "Could you please check with Ms. Morales or Margaret Kane? This is a critical systems flight." Before he could reply, the sound of polished shoes approached from behind. Leah turned to see Colin Pratt, the CEO of the private terminal, walking toward them. His silver hair was combed back, his suit impeccable, his expression composed in a way that told her he was used to being the final word in a room. "Is there a problem here?" Pratt asked smoothly. The receptionist explained, and Pratt's eyes shifted to Leah with an assessing gaze. "Ah, Ms. Morgan, I've heard about your system. Impressive work for someone your age, but the manifest is locked. If your name isn't on it, there's nothing I can do. It's not just work for someone my age." Leah replied, keeping her tone calm. "It's the system you're flying today. Without me on board, there's no live monitoring. That compromises the test and the security of the aircraft." Pratt's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We have capable staff on board who can observe." Leah's pulse quickened, but she refused to raise her voice. "Your staff didn't write the code. They don't know how to troubleshoot it mid-flight. If something happens, the delay could cost us the integrity of the entire project." For a brief second, Pratt's jaw tightened. "I understand your concerns, but procedures exist for a reason. My responsibility is to maintain order here, and that means sticking to the manifest." Leah realized then that this wasn't just about procedure. There was something in his tone, a subtle dismissal, as if he had decided the moment he saw her that she didn't belong in that cabin. "Then let's confirm with Ms. Kane right now," Leah said. "I'm sure she'll clarify." Pratt's voice cooled further. "Ms. Kane is already on board. The cabin is in pre-flight lockdown. I won't be disturbing her for this." Her mind raced. She could feel eyes from nearby passengers and staff drifting toward them. Some looked away quickly. Others lingered, curiosity barely concealed. She wanted to push harder, to demand an explanation in front of everyone. But she knew giving in to frustration would only hand Pratt more power over the situation. She opened her bag and pulled out her tablet. "The system is active right now," she said evenly. "If I'm denied boarding, I'll have to send a notification through the administrative channel stating that the assigned system operator has been removed from the flight. That will create a record that will go directly to Aeroglobe's headquarters." Pratt's smile thinned. "I see you've thought about this. I design for contingencies." Leah said. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Pratt gave a small shrug, as though indulging a stubborn child. I'll allow you to wait in the observation lounge. If someone from Aeroglobe confirms your role, you can board. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't the outright no she had expected. She followed the receptionist to a glass-walled lounge overlooking the runway. The Gulfstream G700 sat at the far end, its sleek white body catching the light like a blade. Leah sat down, her tablet on her lap, and pulled up the system's live dashboard. The biometric scan for crew members was already complete. Her own credentials were still pending, locked out by the manifest restriction. She typed a quick message to Elena Morales through the secure channel at Peachtree Terminal. Pratt says I'm not on manifest. Locked in lounge. Please confirm boarding. The minutes crawled. Outside. She watched as catering trucks rolled up to the plane, fuel hoses connected, and the last pieces of luggage were loaded. The engines began their slow, rumbling start sequence. Finally, her tablet pinged. A message from Elena. I'm on my way. Do not leave that lounge. Leah exhaled slowly. The knot in her stomach didn't ease, but at least she wasn't invisible in this moment. 5 minutes later, Elena arrived, her security badge visible on a lanyard. She walked straight past the receptionist and into the lounge, her expression sharp enough to cut glass. Colin. She called out to Pratt, who had been speaking to another staff member nearby. Why is my systems operator not on the plane? Pratt's measured tone returned instantly. Her name wasn't on the manifest. I can't override that without you can... Elena interrupted. And you will. Ms. Kane approved Leah's boarding weeks ago. This is a secured operations flight, and removing the operator violates protocol. Pratt hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly to Leah before returning to Elena. If you insist, I'll make the adjustment. Good, Elena said, because if that plane leaves without her, the log I sent to Chicago will make it very clear where the breach in process occurred. Within minutes, Leah's credentials appeared in the system. She followed Elena through the gate and onto the tarmac. The roar of the engines vibrated in her chest as they climbed the stairs into the Gulfstream. Inside, Margaret Kane was seated near the front, speaking quietly with Captain Harris Cole. When she saw Leah, she smiled. Glad you're here. We're wheels up in 10. Leah managed a small nod, but inside, something had shifted. The system might be bulletproof, but today had reminded her of an uncomfortable truth. The real vulnerabilities weren't always in the code. Sometimes they were in the people holding the doors. The cabin of the Gulfstream G700 hummed with a soft, almost soothing vibration as the engines settled into their climb. Sunlight streamed through the oval windows, painting arcs of gold across the cream leather seats. Leah sat at the workstation assigned to her near the middle of the cabin, her tablet synced to the onboard terminal. Margaret Kane glanced back from her seat toward Leah. Once we level off, give me a quick status update on how the system is performing, she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes, the kind that came from knowing this was more than just another flight. Leah nodded, adjusting the small earpiece linked to the system's internal feed. The biometric authentication logs scrolled down her screen, each line a confirmation that crew members were in the right place at the right time. She felt the knot in her chest loosening as the data confirmed what she had worked so hard to ensure. Captain Harris Cole's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 41,000 feet. Flight time to San Francisco will be just under 4 hours. The moment the seatbelt sign switched off, Leah began her scan. Heart rate steady, oxygen saturation normal, she thought. Every metric was where it should be. But just as she was about to settle into the rhythm of monitoring, the system emitted a short, sharp chime, the alert she had built for priority anomalies. Her eyes narrowed on the screen. A crew access panel in the aft service galley had just registered an unauthorized attempt to open. The system had locked it instantly, tagging the entry as denied, non-credentialed access, but the timestamp made her pulse quicken. It had happened less than 20 seconds ago. Leah tapped into the internal CCTV feed linked to that zone. The angle showed the narrow galley, empty now, but the panel cover was still slightly ajar. She rose from her seat and made her way toward the rear, her steps quiet on the plush carpet. A flight attendant, tall and impeccably dressed in Aeroglobe's Navy uniform, turned from the beverage counter as Leah approached. "Can I help you?" the attendant asked, her tone polite, but with an edge of guardedness. "I'm monitoring the security system. That panel was accessed without authorization just now." "Was that you?" The attendant blinked, then shook her head. "No, I haven't touched it." Leah crouched, inspecting the panel. The latch bore faint smudges, as though someone's fingers had brushed it recently. Whoever had tried hadn't left enough evidence to be obvious. But the system's log didn't lie. "Could anyone else have been back here in the last minute?" she asked. The attendant hesitated, eyes flicking toward the aisle. I stepped forward to deliver a tray to the cockpit. When I came back, it looked the same as before. Leah straightened, her mind turning over possibilities. Someone on board either didn't realize that every panel was under live surveillance, or they were testing her system deliberately. Both options meant trouble. She returned to her workstation and sent a secure note to Elena Morales, who was seated a few rows behind Margaret Kane. Aft panel breach attempt denied. Reviewing footage now. Elena's reply came almost instantly. "Stay on it. Could be routine curiosity or a deliberate probe. Don't tip anyone off yet." Leah adjusted her monitoring settings to flag any access attempts across all service panels. The screen filled with small green indicators, all clear for now, but her mind kept returning to the open latch. She had built the system to be proactive, to shut down access before a breach became a danger. That it had worked was reassuring. That someone had tested it this early in the flight was not. 2 hours in, the flight settled into a quiet lull. Passengers read or dozed. Crew members moved gracefully through the cabin with trays of drinks and snacks. Leah kept her eyes on the logs, her hands resting lightly on the keyboard. Then it happened again. This time, the alert came from the forward maintenance compartment, just outside the cockpit. The attempt was blocked instantly, but the anomaly carried an extra flag. The device signature used in the attempt belonged to an active crew credential. Someone with legitimate clearance had just tried to override a system they knew was locked. Leah's fingers tightened on the tablet. She cross-referenced the device signature and found the name. Her gaze lifted toward the cockpit. It belonged to the first officer. She didn't move right away. A dozen thoughts pressed at her mind. Was this part of an internal stress test ordered by someone like Richard Voss without telling her? Or was it a crew member going rogue either way? Confronting a pilot mid-flight was not a step to take lightly. Elena noticed her stillness and leaned in. "What is it?" Leah lowered her voice. "Forward maintenance panel. Attempted override using first officer's credentials. Elena's brows drew together. That's not in the test plan. She rose quietly. Stay here. Keep monitoring. I'll talk to Kane. Leah watched as Elena moved to Margaret Kane's seat, bending low to speak quietly. Kane's expression didn't change, but her eyes flicked once toward the cockpit door. She nodded once to Elena, who then disappeared down the aisle toward the front of the aircraft. Minutes passed. The logs remained clear, but Leah felt the weight of what she didn't know. She remembered the first week of her trials in Chicago when a senior engineer had said every system fails eventually. It's just a question of when and under what pressure. She had built her work to push that moment as far away as possible. But now, pressure was building in ways she hadn't anticipated. When Elena returned, she carried the composed face of someone holding more than she was ready to share. She sat down across from Leah. First officer claims he was verifying the panel's biometric sensor. Says it's routine. I've locked that compartment for the rest of the flight. No exceptions. Leah searched her tone for any sign of doubt. Do you believe him? Elena's eyes were steady. I believe in controlling variables. For now, keep everything locked down. If there's another attempt, I want it recorded from 3 angles. The rest of the flight passed without further alerts, but Leah's focus never wavered. She felt as though she was holding the threads of a tapestry that someone else was quietly trying to unravel. As the coastline of California came into view, Captain Harris Cole's voice returned to the intercom. We'll begin our descent into San Francisco shortly. Please prepare for landing. Leah saved every log, every frame of footage, every line of data from the flight. She had a feeling she might need it sooner than anyone expected. When the wheels touched down and the engines began to wind down, she finally allowed herself to take a deep breath. But in the back of her mind, the thought remained sharp and unshakable. The system had passed its first real-world test, but someone on that plane had been testing her. The San Francisco air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of salt from the bay. As Leah stepped off the Gulfstream and onto the private terminal's tarmac, she felt both relief and unease, relief that the system had performed without failure. Unease because her mind kept circling back to the 2 panel incidents mid-flight. Margaret Kane was waiting at the bottom of the mobile staircase, her tailored charcoal coat moving slightly in the breeze. She gave Leah an approving nod. Good work today. I'll want a debrief first thing tomorrow morning at headquarters. Yes, ma'am, Leah said, keeping her expression neutral. Margaret moved off toward a waiting black sedan, but Elena Morales lingered near the wing, her gaze scanning the surrounding activity as though cataloging every face and movement. When Leah reached her, Elena spoke in a low voice. Do not let your guard down. What happened on that flight was not random. I want every log and camera angle archived tonight. Back 'em up in 3 separate locations. Leah felt the warning in her tone as much as she heard it. You think it's sabotage? I think someone is testing how far they can push without being caught. That means they're looking for blind spots. They walked toward the terminal together, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the carpet inside. Leah wanted to press for more names, motives, anything but something in Elena's posture told her the conversation was over for now. Inside the terminal, Aeroglobe's local operations officer approached with a clipboard. Ms. Morgan, you're booked at the Palisade Hotel for the summit. Transportation is waiting outside. The Palisade was all glass and steel, overlooking the waterfront. The room they had given her faced the bay, the city lights shimmering on the water. It should have been the kind of place where she could exhale, but her mind refused to rest. She set her tablet on the desk and began pulling the security logs from the flight. Each entry was tagged with time, location, and credential data. The 2 breach attempts glared from the list like warning flares. She replayed the camera footage from the aft galley first. No face in the frame, just that slightly ajar panel. Then she moved to the forward maintenance compartment footage. The image showed the first officer standing just outside the cockpit door. He looked down at the panel, swiped his card against the reader, and when the denial message flashed, he stepped back quickly, glancing toward the aisle before disappearing into the cockpit. Leah paused the footage and zoomed in on his face. Calm, almost too calm. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from her father, landed yet. Yes, everything's fine, she typed back, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She barely had time to plug in her tablet before the room phone rang. Picking it up, she heard Elena's voice. "I'm downstairs in the lobby. We need to talk." Leah grabbed her blazer and met her by the entrance, where Elena was leaning casually against a pillar, her eyes scanning the room like she was still on duty. They stepped outside into the cool evening air. "I spoke to Kane after we landed," Elena said. "She knows about both incidents, but here's the thing. Neither was listed in the official test plan, which means either someone inside the crew decided to improvise or someone outside gave them instructions." Leah crossed her arms, the wind catching her hair. Why would they do that? The system isn't even public yet. Exactly, Elena said. That makes it the perfect time to discredit it, if they can make it look unstable or vulnerable before the summit. Aeroglobe might shelve it. Leah thought about the locked manifest in Atlanta, about Pratt's smooth dismissal, about the first officer's controlled reaction when the system denied him. "You think it's connected? I think patterns rarely happen by accident," Elena replied. "And if I'm right, this won't be the last test. The next one could be bolder." The words lingered in Leah's mind long after she returned to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the lights flickering over the water. For years, she had worked toward this moment, believing that the biggest challenges would be technical, getting the system to perform flawlessly, proving her ideas in a high-stakes environment. She had not expected to be playing defense against people in the very network she was trying to protect. The next morning, Aeroglobe's headquarters in San Francisco was buzzing with summit preparations. Banners for the Tech Innovations Expo hung in the lobby, journalists and industry figures moving between conference rooms. Leah and Elena made their way to a secure floor where Margaret Kane was waiting with 2 other executives. Richard Voss was among them. He gave Leah a polite nod as they all sat around a sleek conference table. Kane opened the meeting. "Leah, your system performed as expected yesterday, but we've reviewed the anomaly logs. We want your perspective on what happened." Leah took them through both incidents, showing the panel access attempts and the footage. She kept her voice steady, but she could feel Richard Voss's eyes on her, weighing every word. When she finished, Voss leaned back in his chair. "It's possible these were harmless. Pilots and crew sometimes check compartments out of habit." Leah met his gaze. Then they should have logged the checks in the crew activity file. Neither attempt was logged. Margaret Kane nodded once. "I agree. This was not protocol. Elena, I want the crew debriefed before the summit flight tomorrow. Leah, Keep monitoring remotely tonight in case anything else happens with the system." As the meeting broke up, Voss lingered. When Leah moved to leave, he stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "You're talented, but be careful. In this industry, the threats you see are never the ones that end you. It's the ones you never notice until it's too late." She left the room with his words settling uncomfortably in her thoughts. That night, she set up her monitoring station in her hotel room, keeping one screen on the live system feed and another on the summit's internal network chatter. At 11:37 p.m., a new alert pinged. Someone had accessed the pre-flight checklist file for the Gulfstream, the file that would determine tomorrow's manifest. Leah's eyes scanned the log. The access came from a device registered to Colin Pratt. The glow from Leah's tablet lit up the hotel room in soft blue, her eyes fixed on the line of text that confirmed what she feared. The pre-flight checklist for the summit demonstration flight had been opened and altered by a device registered to Colin Pratt. The modification time was marked just 2 minutes before she saw the alert. Her pulse quickened. She tapped into the edit log. Passenger manifest updated. One name removed. It was hers. Leah sat back in the desk chair, the city lights of San Francisco glittering outside her window. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. This was not a careless oversight. Someone was working hard to keep her off that aircraft. She reached for her phone and called Elena Morales. The line picked up on the first ring. "Elena, they did it again," Leah said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "Manifest just updated. My name is gone." Access came from Pratt's device. There was a pause on the other end, then Elena's voice, low and measured. "Stay in your room. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't send anything over unsecured channels." 20 minutes felt like an hour. Leah opened the system's back end and locked down her personal operator credentials. If they tried to log in as her, they would hit a wall of authentication traps she had buried deep in the code. When Elena arrived, she moved quickly into the room, closing the door with a quiet click. Her eyes flicked to Leah's screen, scanning the log. "This is deliberate. They're cutting you out so you can't be there to respond if something goes wrong tomorrow." Leah's throat tightened. "So they can say the system failed without me on board." "Exactly," Elena said. "And if that happens in front of the media, Aeroglobe might pull the project entirely." Leah leaned back in her chair, the realization settling like a weight across her shoulders. She had poured years into this system. Every line of code, every sensor calibration, every test flight. And now, the biggest threat wasn't a technical flaw, it was a coordinated effort to erase her. Elena paced the room. "We could escalate this to Kane right now, but Pratt's not operating alone. If we go too early, they'll close ranks." "So, what do?" Leah asked. "We make sure you're on that flight no matter what they try. And we make sure you have eyes on everything that happens from the moment that plane starts boarding." The next morning, the terminal was a hive of activity. Journalists in tailored suits, photographers with heavy cameras slung around their necks, Aeroglobe staff moving with rehearsed precision. The Gulfstream G700 stood at the far end of the tarmac, spotless and gleaming. Leah walked in beside Elena, her security badge clipped where it was visible. Pratt was near the reception desk, speaking to a small group of executives. When his eyes found hers, his smile was thin and polite. "Ms. Morgan," he said, stepping forward. "I'm afraid there's been a manifest error. Your role today will be monitoring from the ground." Leah met his gaze without blinking. "There's no error. I was approved by CEO Kane herself. My place is on board." Pratt spread his hands slightly, as though helpless. "I can only work from the information I'm given." Before Leah could reply, Elena stepped in. "Funny thing. Colin, the system flagged your device accessing the manifest at 11:37 p.m. last night. That's a secured file, and as far as I know, you weren't authorized to touch it." The shift in Pratt's expression was subtle, a faint tightening at the corners of his mouth. "I review many files in the course of my work. If there's a misunderstanding, I'm sure we can clear it up later." "We'll clear it up now," Elena said, turning to the nearest operations officer. "Pull up the manifest before the edit, restore it, and get Ms. Morgan's credentials active for boarding." The officer hesitated, glancing between Elena and Pratt. Then he nodded and moved toward a terminal. Pratt's voice softened, almost conversational. "You're making quite a name for yourself. Ms. Morgan, just be careful. Some names don't last long in this business." Leah didn't answer. She watched the officer at the terminal, her chest tightening until he returned and handed her a printed manifest with her name back in place. Boarding began 20 minutes later. Cameras flashed as Margaret Kane arrived, speaking briefly to reporters before making her way up the aircraft steps. Leah followed Elena through the narrow boarding corridor. The air rich with the faint scent of jet fuel and polished leather from inside the cabin. Once inside, she took her seat at the workstation, immediately syncing her tablet to the onboard system. The feed lit up with green indicators as crew and passengers authenticated. Everything was running smoothly, but she knew better than to relax. As the last passenger boarded, Leah glanced toward the cockpit. The first officer was already seated, eyes on his controls. She remembered the footage from the day before, the quick, unauthorized swipe at the maintenance panel, and felt a ripple of unease. Margaret Kane stopped by her workstation before takeoff. "Leah, today's about showing the world what your system can do. I want a full real-time report after we're in the air." "Yes, ma'am," Leah said. The cabin door closed, engines spooled up. The plane began its slow taxi toward the runway. Through the oval window, Leah watched the terminal recede, the world outside narrowing to the hum of the cabin and the glow of her screen. In her earpiece, the system's voice was calm and precise, all compartments secured, all crew authenticated. She let out a slow breath. The summit flight was underway, but somewhere inside, she knew the real test hadn't started yet. Whoever had tried to erase her from this moment wasn't done, and this time, if they made their move, she would be ready to answer. The Gulfstream climbed smoothly, its engines humming like a low heartbeat beneath the cabin floor. Leah's fingers hovered over her tablet as she watched each system status update flow across the screen. Every green icon was a reassurance, but she knew from the last 2 days that green could turn to red in seconds. Around her, the cabin carried the murmur of quiet conversations. Reporters sat with tablets and cameras, some already typing up their early impressions. Margaret Kane spoke in low tones to Richard Voss near the forward seating area, their expressions unreadable. At 38,000 feet, the seatbelt sign dimmed. A flight attendant passed by offering drinks, her polished smile a perfect mask of hospitality. Leah barely looked up. Then the tone changed. A chime echoed in her earpiece, sharp and urgent. One of the forward service compartments had registered an unauthorized manual override attempt. This time, the system was still holding, but the code sequence in the log made her pulse spike. Whoever was trying knew enough to attack the biometric module, directly bypassing the standard lockout routine. Leah tapped into the live internal feed. The camera in the compartment showed a shadow in the narrow space just outside the cockpit. The first officer's uniform sleeve was visible, his hands working quickly at the panel. "Elena," Leah whispered into her comm. "We have a live breach attempt. Forward service compartment, first officer, across the aisle." Elena's posture stiffened. She touched her own earpiece. "Keep him on camera. Do not trigger the public alert unless the system is compromised. Kane needs to know." Leah's eyes tracked the code feed. The system was repelling the intrusion, but only just. Every time the first officer injected a new command, her software pushed back, forcing a reset. It was like watching two chess players move at lightning speed. Suddenly, the code execution rate doubled. He was using a secondary device, one she hadn't seen on the crew manifest. Leah's chest tightened. This was no casual check. This was a full-scale attempt to crash the system's credibility. Margaret Kane appeared at her side. "Talk to me." Leah kept her voice low, aware of the press nearby. "He is attempting to bypass the biometric lock. If he succeeds, the system will register a false fault and appear unreliable." Kane's jaw tightened. "Can you stop him?" "Yes," Leah said, "but I have to push a manual counter-command. It will lock the panel completely for the rest of the flight. He will know I did it." "Do it," Kane said. Leah's fingers flew across the touch screen. She bypassed the automated defense protocol and injected a hard code lockout, sealing the compartment's controls behind 3 layers of encryption. On the camera feed, the first officer's movements stilled. He looked directly into the lens for a moment, then turned away and disappeared into the cockpit. The system cleared to all green. Leah exhaled slowly, but the relief was short-lived. 30 minutes later, another alert flashed, this time from the aft galley. The attempt was different, aimed at a subsystem that handled environmental controls. A failure there could force the crew to declare a maintenance diversion, grounding the plane before it reached the summit. Leah switched feeds. The camera showed a different crew member this time, a flight attendant she had not spoken to before. The attendant moved quickly, pulling a small tool from her pocket and reaching for the panel latch. Leah hit the lockdown command before she could make contact. The panel lights went dark, denying all input. The attendant froze, glanced around, and then walked away briskly. "Elena," Leah said into the comm, "second attempt in the aft galley. Different crew member. I see it." Elena replied, "This is coordinated. Someone on the ground is feeding them instructions. Keep recording." By now, the energy in the cabin had shifted. Even the reporters could sense something under the surface. One leaned over to whisper to his colleague, eyes flicking toward Leah's workstation. Margaret Kane stepped forward to the center aisle, her voice steady but carrying enough authority to reach every seat. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while we conduct a routine system verification. There is no cause for concern." Leah continued scanning. If they had failed twice, they might try something bolder, perhaps attempting to reset the entire onboard security system from a crew terminal. That kind of breach would need 2 simultaneous access points, one forward and one aft. Her screen flashed again. Both compartments forward and aft showed access attempts within the same 5-second window. Leah's heart thudded. This was it. the coordinated strike. She opened the dual-lock override panel on her tablet. The system asked for a master code, one only she and her father knew. Her fingers entered it without hesitation. The system responded with a soft tone. Manual override engaged. Every service panel in the aircraft went into secure lockdown, sealed until the landing sequence. The logs confirmed it. Green across the board. No access permitted anywhere outside the cockpit's main flight systems. In the forward camera feed, the first officer stared at the locked panel, lips moving in what looked like a curse. In the aft, the flight attendant slammed the panel shut, her face tight with frustration. Leah leaned back, letting the adrenaline ebb just enough for her hands to steady. She had stopped them, but the truth was clear. This was no test. This was an intentional effort to undermine her and her system in front of the people who could decide its future. Margaret Kane returned to her side, speaking quietly. "Whatever happens when we land, you just proved your system works under pressure. I will make sure that is the story." Leah nodded, but in her mind, another thought was already forming. If they were willing to try this in front of the press and under Kane's watch, then they were confident they could get away with it. That meant the real fight would start after the wheels touched down. Outside the window, the Pacific coastline began to curve into view, the sunlight shimmering on the water. The summit was only minutes away, and Leah was ready for the next move, no matter where it came from. The landing felt smooth, almost gentle, the soft thump of the wheels and the long breath of reverse thrust rolling under the cabin floor. Leah saved her final log, closed two mirrored backups, and pressed her palms together for a second, letting the hum of the engines settle inside her chest. The forward door opened. Light spilled down the aisle. A ripple of movement passed through the cabin as passengers reached for bags and phones and practiced smiles for the waiting press. From her workstation, Leah watched the status panel go green to idle. Every service compartment locked. Every access event stamped and sealed. It should have been the easiest walk of her life. Step off, breathe, accept the nod from Margaret Kane, move the project into its next chapter. At the top of the stairs, the air smelled of jet fuel and ocean salt. Cameras were set up near the cordon, lenses already raised. A line of airport security staff stood along the boundary tape. At the center of them, crisp and unflinching, was Colin Pratt. He looked as if he had been waiting there for hours. He did not look at the reporters. He looked at Leah. "Miss Morgan, please step aside." The words were flat, final. They fell between them like a barrier you could not see but could feel. Margaret Kane was just behind Leah, one hand resting lightly on the rail. She took a half step forward. On what grounds Pratt did not blink. Manual override was engaged in flight. That triggers a mandatory post-landing security review for any non-flight crew operator. Miss Morgan is listed as a consultant, not as flight crew. Elena Morales came down from the forward aisle with the calm of someone who had learned to hold her posture as a kind of armor. That review will be conducted by Aeroglobe and the FAA liaison, not by the private terminal. The override was necessary and successful. The aircraft is secure. Pratt's smile was thin. Protocol is clear. Anyone who engages a system-wide lock on a live flight remains in custody until ground authorities complete verification. We are the ground authority here. Richard Voss stepped onto the stairs, pausing to read the scene. His expression was unreadable. Cameras clicked. A reporter called out a question about a glitch. Another asked whether the new security technology had failed. Kane lifted her chin. The system did not fail. It prevented an unauthorized access and recorded 2 coordinated attempts to tamper with secure compartments. Miss Morgan ensured the safety of the flight. That is the story. Pratt gestured to 2 security officers. Please accompany Ms. Morgan to a private room for questioning. Her device will be held during the interview. Leah felt the pressure of a dozen eyes. It would be so easy to flare, to call him out for the manifest edits, to say what she knew and show what she had recorded, but she could hear her father as clearly as if he stood beside her. Pick the moment you want to win. She looked at Pratt first, then at the cameras, then at Kane. My tablet contains the full cryptographic record of every attempt made during the flight. If it leaves my hands, the chain of custody is broken, and any review becomes meaningless. A murmur moved through the press. Pratt's jaw flexed. He turned slightly toward Kane, as if offering her a chance to choose the quiet path. Aeroglobe can send me a copy. For now, the device is held. Elena's voice was low, controlled. Touch that tablet and I will log a forced seizure into the Federal Incident Registry with your name attached to it. Kane did not raise her voice. The device stays with Ms. Morgan. Any interview will take place in the presence of Aeroglobe Counsel and the FAA liaison, and it will happen after our press briefing. For a breath, it looked like Pratt might nod and step back. Then he did something else. He lifted a hand toward the aircraft behind them. If the consultant truly performed the action she claims, she can prove it. Authenticate the aircraft. Right now, under observation, without cockpit support. If she has the authority she claims, the door will recognize it. If not, we proceed as required. Reporters straightened, lenses focused. The sudden hush felt louder than any shout. Elena leaned in, just enough for Leah to hear. This is a trap. He wants a public stumble. He wants a clip he can replay for the next month. Leah's heart thudded once, hard, then steadied. She thought of the midnight edits, the locked manifest, the way the first officer had stared directly into the lens when the panel sealed. She thought of the girl she had been at the kitchen table, twisting pasta into knots while her father said the truth carries its own volume. She faced Kane. If I authenticate, every access is recorded. It will put this aircraft into a verified secure state, and that state will timestamp to this moment. We will have a public record that cannot be spun. Kane studied her face. Do you have what you need? Leah raised the tablet, biometric hand scan at the door, credential handshake, dynamic authorization code, 30 seconds. Voss stepped closer, eyes narrowing as if he were running numbers in his head. 30 seconds in front of cameras is longer than you think. Leah did not look away. That is why I built it to work in 20. Kane's decision was visible only in the smallest shift of her shoulders. Proceed. Pratt's smile returned, brittle at the edges. Security will maintain a perimeter. No one touches the airframe until Ms. Morgan completes her demonstration. If she is unable to authenticate, we move immediately to formal custody. He said custody the way some people say courtesy, as if the shape of the word could disguise the intent. They walked as a group across the tarmac. Sunlight slid along the fuselage, bright enough to make Leah squint. The cameras kept their distance at the tape line, but the lenses felt close. She could hear the beeps of focus locks, the soft clicks of shutters. At the base of the stairs, the boarding door stood closed. The scanner was set into the frame, a small square with a pulsing ring of pale blue light. Leah wiped her palm on the side of her blazer. Not for the scan. For the nerves she refused to let show. She positioned her tablet on her left forearm so the camera could see the interface without revealing the secure fields. She held her right hand over the scanner. The blue light brightened. Biometric ready. Her fingerprint registered in less than a breath. A soft tone sounded from the panel. The first layer was complete. She felt her pulse flatten into a steady line. Credential handshake. She tapped her tablet. The device paired with the aircraft's access node. A string of characters scrolled, then compressed into a green bar. Second layer complete. Dynamic code. She glanced at the corner of the screen where the algorithm cycled the 30-second permissions. 12 seconds remained on the current sequence. She waited, not because she had to, because she wanted the rhythm of the next cycle to start here, with all of them watching. 5 seconds, 4, 3. She entered the code. The characters disappeared into the field. The scanner's ring went from pale blue to white. A single click echoed in the bright air as the internal bolts released. The door did not swing open. Not yet. The system always waited for a final confirmation, a small safeguard against accidental unlocks. It was a design choice she had argued for and defended through 3 rounds of review. Leah lifted her eyes from the tablet and looked directly at Pratt, then at the nearest camera, then at Margaret Kane. Confirm. Her fingertip pressed the panel. The door seals hissed as pressure equalized. The handle moved on its own, unlocking. The reporters spoke all at once, questions tumbling over one another. Security shifted. Uncertain for the first time, Pratt's expression went still, like a mask that had been set aside and forgotten. Leah kept her hand on the frame until the door reached its stop. She did not step inside. Not yet. The moment was not about entering. It was about the lock that had yielded to the right hand, the right code, the right to belong. She turned back to the semicircle of lenses and faces. Her voice carried without needing to rise. I built this system. It recognizes the people who keep this aircraft safe. It recognized me. Elena let out a breath she had been holding. Kane stood a fraction taller. Voss's mouth tipped, the slightest nod, as if acknowledging the clean elegance of a proof. Pratt cleared his throat. The color had drained from his face, but his voice reached for its former certainty. Authentication does not resolve the need for a review. We will still. Leah lifted the tablet, then let it fall to her side. We can review everything, on the record, but we will do it with the door open. The cameras flashed again, catching the image of a young woman standing at the threshold with the aircraft behind her and the sun in her hair. For an instant, the noise of the tarmac fell away, and there was only the quiet satisfaction of a result that spoke for itself. Somewhere inside the terminal, a clock ticked past the top of the hour. Somewhere in a quiet kitchen, a father would see this clip and know exactly how his daughter had chosen her moment. The door was open. The review could begin, and the next move would not be in the shadows. The door stood open. Heat shimmered on the tarmac. For a long second, no one moved. Then Margaret Kane spoke with the evenness of a pilot in heavy weather. We will conduct the review on board. Captain Cole, prepare the cabin for a controlled demonstration. FAA liaison to the aisle. press may observe from the forward seats, no one touches the flight deck. Captain Harris Cole gave a crisp nod and stepped inside. The cabin lights came up to a soft white. Reporters filed in behind security tape that crew had clipped across the first row. Elena Morales guided the FAA liaison to the center aisle and took a position by the galley. Colin Pratt entered last, eyes scanning every face as if counting allies. Leah crossed the threshold with her tablet held close. The aircraft felt different with the door open to a crowd. The quiet that had wrapped the cabin in flight had been replaced by a murmur of curiosity. Camera lights reflected off polished wood and cream leather. "We will project to the main bulkhead monitor," Elena said. "Leah, you control the playback." Leah linked the tablet to the cabin display. The aeroglobe seal appeared. Then the dashboard she had been watching for hours. Rows of timestamps, green and amber indicators, a steady heartbeat of data. "For the record," Leah said, her voice steady, "every access event during flight is signed with a cryptographic key and a time code from a tamper-resistant clock. What you see now is a read-only view. This log cannot be altered from this device." She selected the first alert, the forward maintenance compartment. The video feed filled the screen. The first officer stood in the narrow space outside the cockpit. His face was calm. His right hand held a small device, angled toward the panel. Leah tapped a tile in the corner. A code stream overlaid the image. Each block in the stream carried the device signature that had attempted access. "This signature belongs to the first officer's crew badge," she said. The attempt was denied. The system returned a lock state in under 1 second. The FAA liaison leaned toward the screen. "Confirm the source for the signature." Leah showed the credential table, name, badge ID, device hash. The liaison compared the numbers to a printed sheet. Confirmed. "Now the aft galley," Leah said. The second attempt. The screen switched. The flight attendant moved into frame, tool in hand, fingers reaching for the latch. Leah froze the frame an instant before the touch. A second code stream appeared. This time, the signature was not a crew badge. It was an unregistered device that had already made 3 handshake pings against the aircraft router before this moment. This device never authenticated, Leah said. It was trying to ride the signal of the nearest approved terminal. The lockout forced a dead state and sent an alert to my station. A reporter raised a hand. "How do we know this was not staged to make the system look heroic?" Leah looked to the FAA liaison, then back to the camera. "The system marks the origin of each command at the network level. The unregistered device pinged a router that does not exist on the aircraft. It pinged the private terminal network at Atlanta Peachtree. The timestamps show repeated contact before departure and again while we were airborne when the ground relay was within range." She brought up a small map rendering. A dot pulsed at the terminal operations suite. The same device had opened the manifest file the night before. The log connected the dots without drama. Each event a bead on a line only one person would have wanted to string. Colin Pratt cleared his throat. "Device identifiers can be spoofed. You cannot assert a conclusion from a dot on a map." Leah did not look away. "Then we will not draw a conclusion. We will read the record." She tapped again. The screen split. On one side, the midnight edit log for the manifest file. On the other, a network security record supplied by Aeroglobe headquarters that identified every admin session that touched the file in the last 24 hours. Both entries carried the same device hash, both resolved to the same workstation, The overlay tag displayed the registered user. The FAA liaison said it before anyone else. The workstation belongs to the office of the terminal's CEO. The cabin went very quiet. Margaret Kane spoke to the liaison more than to the room. We will provide you with the full chain of custody, and we will cooperate with any inquiry. The demonstration is the purpose of this flight. The system prevented access. The passengers and crew were safe. Captain Cole stepped forward, sleeves ironed into perfect lines. The manual lockout the consultant engaged was proper and timely. It preserved the integrity of the aircraft. At no point was flight safety compromised. A reporter aimed a question at Leah. Did you fear the system would fail? Leah thought of the kitchen clock at home and the way fear tried to sound like intelligence when it came dressed as what if. I feared that people would decide the story before they saw the proof. That is why we keep records, to give the truth its own weight. She was aware of Pratt as a shape at the edge of her vision. He moved a fraction, then stopped. He had the look of someone who had expected a stumble and instead met a foundation. Richard Voss finally spoke. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Innovation does not eliminate risk. It manages it with discipline. What we saw today was discipline in action. We stand with our engineer. The words engineer landed in the air like an antidote. Leah felt them settle into her chest. Not the girl, not the consultant, the engineer. Pratt tried one last angle. The public nature of this review is highly irregular. The terminal has procedures for Kane turned to him. The terminal has procedures for moving luggage and pouring coffee and providing a quiet lounge. It does not have procedures for seizing proprietary devices or editing our manifests without authorization. You are relieved of any involvement with this flight or any Aeroglobe operation until the FAA completes its review. Security shifted by instinct to flank Pratt. He did not resist. He did not speak. He simply looked at Leah for one heartbeat too long, as if recalibrating a story he had been telling himself. Then he walked down the aisle and out into the white sun. The FAA liaison closed a folder. We will debrief the crew members involved in the access attempts. For now, the focus returns to the summit demonstration. We appreciate the clarity of your records. Ms. Morgan? Leah nodded. Her hands were steady now. Inside, something unwound that had been coiled since the first alert at altitude. She had not wanted a spectacle. She had wanted a fair hearing. The evidence had given her that. Elena touched Leah's shoulder lightly. You did not let the moment choose you. You chose it. Leah allowed herself a small breath of a smile. She turned back to the display and set the logs to archive. The screen returned to the Aeroglobe seal. The cabin lights eased to a warmer tone as if the aircraft itself were settling. Reporters stood and began to file out, already composing their versions of what they had seen. Captain Cole shook Leah's hand with the simple respect of one professional to another. Margaret Kane held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, then said what Leah had been working to hear since the first day she wrote a line of code. Well done, engineer. Leah powered down her tablet and looked out through the oval window. The tarmac shimmered. Beyond the fence, the bay lay calm and bright. A gull traced a lazy arc across the water. Her father would be watching a feed by now. He would rewind the moment the door yielded. He would catch the way she waited for the new code cycle. He would see that she had not raised her voice, that the proof had carried itself. The aircraft felt peaceful again. Not silent, not empty, just steady. the way a system feels when each part is doing the work it was built to do. There was one more chapter to write. The summit. The room where ideas meet the people who decide what gets built. Leah sat for a moment longer in the quiet cabin and let herself imagine that room, not as a place she might be allowed to enter, but as a place she was prepared to shape. Morning came with a pale wash of light over the bay and the quiet knock of a hotel door. Leah opened it to find Elena Morales holding 2 coffees and a folder thick with printed logs. They sat by the window where gulls drifted above the water and the city sounded far away. The debrief was simple in its structure and heavy in its consequences. The FAA liaison had reviewed Leah's record set overnight and requested formal statements. The first officer was relieved of duty pending an inquiry. The flight attendant who touched the aft panel had admitted following instructions she claimed came from a ground supervisor. That line would be traced. Colin Pratt had been placed on administrative leave by the terminal board. No one in the room said the word Vindication. It hung there anyway. Margaret Kane arrived a few minutes later with Richard Voss. She set her phone face down on the table and looked at Leah in a way that felt both professional and personal. The look a leader gives when the stakes have been met. "You kept a cabin safe and a story honest," she said. "Thank you." Leah exhaled for what felt like the first time in a day. She thought of the moments when fear had tried to dress up as intelligence. What if they do not believe you? What if the door does not open? What if your voice trembles? None of those came true. The code held. Her voice held. The truth held. Voss rested a hand on the back of a chair. "We have a choice now," he said. "We can treat yesterday as a clean pass and move on, or we can treat it as the beginning of a standard. I prefer standards." Kane slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a letter on Aeroglobe letterhead. The words felt unreal even as Leah read them. Innovation consultant. Immediate appointment concurrent with continued education. Research budget. Access to test platforms. A path defined not by age but by contribution. Leah looked up. Part of her wanted to accept without breath or thought. Another part, the one trained by long nights and careful lines of code, wanted a beat to verify the variables. "I want to finish school," she said, "but I want to keep building. If this lets me do both, if this keeps the system moving forward with integrity, then yes, I accept." Kane's smile was small and genuine. Then, "Welcome to the work." After they left, Leah called her father. He answered on the first ring. She told him everything in a simple sequence. The door, the logs, the offer. Silence filled the line for a heartbeat, the kind that holds more than noise could carry. "Proud of you, kiddo," David said. "Not just for what you built, for how you stood when it mattered." She pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the window and watched a plane turn on final approach, its wings catching sun. When the call ended, she stood a moment longer, letting that pride settle into the places where doubt used to live. 2 days later, the Tech Innovations Expo was still buzzing. Rumors had become headlines. System stops coordinated tampering. Young engineer proves resilience in live demo. Leah moved through it quietly, giving clear statements when asked and declining the narratives that reached for melodrama. The work mattered more than any version of her someone else wanted to write. A week passed, then 2, in a letter drafted on careful legal paper. Pratt issued a public apology to Aeroglobe and to Leah. It stopped well short of confession, yet admitted to failures of procedure and judgment. Embedded in the same news cycle was an announcement that the terminal would fund a program to expand technology internships for underrepresented students. "Apologies do not erase harm," Leah told Elena when they discussed it, "but they can set a direction." Elena nodded, eyes on the runway beyond her office glass. "Let us see if the direction holds." 6 months turned in their patient way. The system matured. Leah's algorithms learned and adapted, not from panic but from the small iterative proof that follows good engineering. She split her time between classes and test bays, between flight decks and lab benches. She learned to accept ordinary days and to use them well. On a gray morning in November, she stood behind a podium at the International Aviation Security Conference, the badge at her collar identifying her as the youngest presenter in the program. The hall was a long room of light and wood and the soft rustle of people finding their seats. In the front row sat Elena and Margaret. A few seats over sat Richard Voss, his posture composed, his attention direct. Near the end of the row, David Morgan held a small notebook he would not need, a habit from years of taking quiet notes anyway. Leah placed her hands on either side of the podium. The microphone caught the first breath and gave it back to the hall. "Security is not a wall you build once," she began. "It is a conversation you keep having, not all at once, not at a single volume, but over time, with care. My team's approach is simple. We assume attackers study our habits, so we build systems that study themselves faster than any outsider can." She moved through slides that did not rely on flourish. Case studies from live deployments, false positive reductions, average response times under mixed conditions. She kept the language exact and accessible. She did not say the word genius. She did not need it. The proof ran itself along the bottom of every chart. Midway through, she paused. The hall breathed with her. "There is a second part to this work," she said. "It is harder to quantify. It is how we choose to read people. Protocols exist to protect safety. They are not tools to narrow who we imagine as an expert. We owe one another the discipline of fairness. We owe our passengers and crews the humility to let results lead." She told them, without naming names, about a day when an airport door decided who belonged. She told them about logs that do not care about age or assumptions. She told them about the quiet power of a recorded truth. Questions followed. Technical ones about algorithmic drift and biometric failure modes. Policy ones about access control and human factors. She answered each with the same calm she used at altitude when the panel lights flashed. The last question came from a student near the back. "How do you stay steady when people doubt you before you begin?" Leah thought of the old brass clock in the kitchen at home, of the way its minute hand kept tracing its circle no matter who watched. "I pick the moment I want to win," she said. "Then I build to that moment and let the record carry my voice." After the session, people lined the aisle to speak to her. Some were colleagues offering collaboration. Some were skeptics now curious enough to test rather than dismiss. One was a high school senior with a small notebook and the particular intensity of someone who had already taught herself more than a textbook had offered. "I did not know there was a place for me here," the young woman said, voice barely above a whisper. Leah smiled and stepped to the side so the student could see the aircraft photo on the projection behind the stage. "There is," she said, "and if a door feels heavy, sometimes it is because it was built for someone else's hand. Learn the mechanics, then make your own key." That evening, As the conference noise fell away to the hush of hotel corridors, Leah took the long escalator down to the empty lobby and walked outside. The air was cool, the kind of cold that wakes the skin. Across the street, a commuter jet climbed into the low cloud and vanished. She thought about the life that had assembled around the work, the mentors who had stood in the draft of the door with her, the people who had tried to push it shut, the students who would one day walk through it without feeling the weight she had felt. Her phone buzzed, a photo from David, the old kitchen clock, the hands at a quiet minute. His text was a single sentence. Truth carries its own volume. She typed back, "I heard it." The next week, Leah stepped onto a different tarmac, this one in the winter light of Chicago. A test airframe waited. The paint still smelled new. Elena walked beside her, hands in the pockets of her coat. Margaret stood near the stairs talking with a small cluster of engineers. Richard Voss watched from a measured distance, giving room without stepping away. Leah placed her hand on the scanner. The ring of light brightened. The credential handshake completed. The dynamic code rolled. She entered it and felt the familiar click. The door opened, not as a miracle, not as luck, as the plain result of work done well and a story told with proof. She stepped inside with the easy grace of someone who belongs in the place she has helped build. The girl they tried to keep groundside now wrote the protocols that lifted others. The door would be heavy for some who followed, but it would be lighter than before. That was the work, too. If your heart is beating a little faster, that is the sound of fairness finding its voice. Leah Morgan did not shout to be seen. She did the work. She kept a cabin safe. She let proof speak where prejudice tried to. In her quiet, steady hands, a locked door opened, not as a favor, but as a fact. We honor the love that raised her, a father who taught her to pick the moment worth winning. We honor the colleagues who stood beside her when it mattered. And we say clearly what the evidence shows. Gatekeeping dressed up as protocol is still gatekeeping. Discrimination, subtle or loud, is not caution. It is harm. It steals from talent. It makes the world less safe. Remember this feeling. The click of the lock, the hush before the truth lands, the relief that follows when integrity holds. If you believe rooms should be opened by results, not assumptions, stay with us. More stories are coming. More doors, more keys in the right hands. Help us carry them further. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you're here for the next moment a heavy door learns to listen.